So today we're covering scope and closure. These are very important concepts in JavaScript and in a lot of programming languages. I say that in every lesson, but these are also very interesting and it's good to understand. As a programmer, when you're getting interviews and jobs, they will 100% ask you what is a closure in JavaScript. That is like a basic question they ask you. Can you explain what closure is? So today we'll explain what it is. I'll give you a practice. I'll give you examples. I'll give you things to practice. So we will see what it is, inshallah. So this module will you'll practice function, scope, and closures. Closures are an important programming concept that often comes up in job interviews. So at the end of this module, you should be able to explain what function or scope are. You should be able to describe what closures are, how closures are created in a program, and why it's important to understand closures in JavaScript. So, what is a scope? So, they give us an example here, but some of you might not have read the last lesson. But they basically scope is where a variable or function is declared. So let's say if there is we talked about in a little bit when we were talking about the var and let and constant. So we said that var is a global scope, and global scope is is a method, is a way of declaring something where everything has access to, like every program that you're running has access to. So scope is the concept where you know where something can be declared and where it cannot be declared. Let's say you have a var. So actually let's start with our code bin because it helps us a little bit more, and I have the notes down. So we can just basically write down what are we talking about instead of just me pointing it out. So let's call this scope and closure, and let's save it. We just save it as a private. It's fine. I'll change the settings. So let's explain what scope is. All right. So scope. What is the scope? So scope is, I have some notes. Scope answers the question of where our variables and functions are declared, are available, and also there's also global variables, and I'll show you example of that. And also there is so those that's okay. So let's skip this first. So let's explain. So scope. Now let's say we have a variable and we call it let's call it global scope, a global variable. Global variable is var. Var is a global variable. Why do we say var is a global variable? So the reason why we say that is because the windows that we have right here. So right here is our Chrome. So if we open the inspector and we go to console, let's clear this, and we type window. Window is a global is a global element, is a global method for the browser. So this is where the browser starts. This is where everything in the browser is connected to this. And it has so many methods, so many things that is connected to the browser. So for example, the back button, the this where you put the stuff, all the extensions, the closing the tab, all that stuff is connected to the window. So it's right there. This is the window. This is called the global variable. I mean global scope, and var is part of this. So if you declare something like, let's say school, let's say something like Gibby School here. Now this is available in the global scope. So if we save it and we let's see, let's go back here. So now if we say let's see, something like window that school. Actually, it's not defined here, but because we're in we're in Codeben, it's not allowing us. If we run in the normal browser, it will allow us. But the main thing is that var is available anywhere, everywhere. So it's not if you create a function and you put the function, not a function, but if you create let. So we did talk about let and the difference between let and var. So let's explain what var does. So var can be replaced. So it's very wishy-washy thing. Can be replaced. It can be declared. And now we're just doing a review of our the first time we did JavaScript, and we talked about var, let, and constant. So and can be also, and it's also function scope. So the reason we say it's a function scope is that uh, it can be if we put var in a function, it can be called from the function. So it's not exclusive to the function. But for let and constant, you cannot call them outside of the function. So that's the difference. So if you want to declare something, you usually use let. Never use let or constant. If you use var, you're basically connecting this variable to the window variable. So you're basically saying, it's like saying var school is equal to Gebi equal, and now if you say window dot school, as you can see, it's connected to the window. But if we say something like let, let's say let name equal to Abdi, and we say that. Now if we say uh, window dot name, we don't get anything. The reason for that is because let is not connected to the global scope, which is the window, but var is connected to global scope. So the reason why most of the time we don't recommend var is because it's going to create more of this stuff, and it's going to slow down your browser and your computer. So let's say you have thousands and millions of var variables in your program, then it's just definitely going to slow down your browser and the programs and everything. So that's why most of the time, recently the programmers and the community doesn't, the developers community they don't use var anymore. So var is no, it's not good. Don't use it most of the time. So that's var. Let's describe let. So let has a couple of things. So let can be, so you could guys tell me too. Can we update let? Can we do this? Can I do the name Abdi, and then can we say something like let name equal to Ahmed? Can we say that? Would it allow us now if we cancel lock?
It will show already declared.
What is it gonna show?
Already declared. It's gonna say.
All right, let's see. So yep. So it says name has already been declared. So you're right. So the reason it's saying that is because we cannot replace the name of let. So so let cannot be, so we cannot redeclare. So redeclaration is the one. So cannot be redeclared. Cannot be redeclared. And also it can be updated. What does that mean is we just updated this, but you could do this. Don't declare it again, but if you take a name and say that, and then you say, okay, before it was an Abdi, now it is Ahmed. So but you didn't say let again, you just took the name and you change it again. So now you should give us Ahmed. So it can be updated. So these things are really important because that's how you know the difference between var and let and constant. So and also it's a block scope. block scope. We'll explain what that means in a little bit. Block scope. So a block scope is that it's not a global scope basically. First of all, but it's also when you put it in a function, when it's outside, the function can get it, but when it's in a function, the outside world cannot get it. So and also that's not what block scope actually means. That's block scope is if you put it in a for loop and if it's statement, you cannot get it from outside, and we'll see example of that in a minute. So if you put let inside a if statement, you cannot call that let, you cannot get the let from outside of the if statement or for loop. So that's the block scope, and it's in our assignment here. Somewhere here explains the block scope and the global scope. So it says that block level scope is used if the statement is if the statement and the for loop, uh, if it's in use of if statement and for loop. So if we use in if statement or for loop, then it's called block level. In a block level variable, a variable declared using either let or constant is only available. It's only available within the statement, within the statement or loop. So we'll see that as an example. So all this stuff might be very difficult to understand, but it's just you just have to like figure it out. So the more times you read, the easier it gets. So scoped. So now let's go to constant. So if we say constant, let's say something like, let's get rid of this. If we say constant city, if we say something like Minneapolis, now can we do this? Constant city. Can we do that? Let's say Columbus. Columbus. Can we say that?
Oh,
What do you think it will log?
it's gonna lag. I don't
Minneapolis
think
or Columbus?
Minneapolis.
Minneapolis. Okay. What do you guys think?
Changed
Is what did you say?
and constant be changed.
The concept cannot be changed. Your voice is a little bit low, so I didn't hear it. So let's go through things about the constant. So constant cannot be, of course, cannot be redeclared. So that's what we just did. We cannot redeclare again the same constant. So this will give us definitely an error. So it will say you cannot declare it again. So the reason for that is constant. It's in the name. It's a constant, so it cannot be changed. Can we do this? Can we keep the Minneapolis? Not keep the Minneapolis, but can we do this and have Minneapolis here too? Can we do that too?
Nah, you're doing the same.
You do the
It's
same. Okay.
declaring again.
Okay. Okay. What about okay? So what about if we do this, just like the let we did? So now we're not declaring it, but we're reassigning it. We're changing it. So let's change it here to something like Seattle. Can we do that?
Mm,
Can we just
I
change
don't.
it?
Uh, I don't think so.
Okay. So that's the main thing you guys got it. So constant is means you cannot change it, you cannot declare it, you
You
cannot
can't reassign it.
cannot be reassigned, cannot be updated, or cannot be and it's block scoped, and which we talked about, which is if it's in if it's statement or if it's in for loop, it cannot be called from outside. But the var you can call it from anywhere. Even in function, you could call var from outside. So that is those are just general things that we kind of covered last time, but it's in more detail now. Just you guys understand. So always use let or constant. Don't use var because it's gonna create it could create a lot of problems for you. Any questions about that review that we went through? Okay, so now let's move on to the real lesson for today. So that's generally about like what that's not what the scope is about, but that's one example of scope is the variables, you know. So we said that knowing, okay, so this is statement to answer the question where our variables and functions are available. So so right now we said that we didn't even cover that yet, but we said that var is available in the global scope, the window scope, but let and constant are not available there. So that's one way we learned, is that where it's available. So if you're looking for something in the global scope, you're not gonna find constant or let. That's one thing. Okay. So let's talk about function level scope. So function scope allows us to create a variable inside functions that's easily private to the function. We cannot reach into the function from outside and get access to those variables, but we are free to use the variables anywhere within our function. Conversely, we do have access a variable outside of the function. It's a one-way street. Functions can reach out and grab variables outside of their scope, but we cannot reach into the function and get the variable. I hope you guys kind of get an idea from there. So let's see. So function scope. Let's kind of make it close to this. Okay, so function scope. Function scope, the general idea of function scope is that variables, when a variable, so we actually kind of read it a little bit now, when a variable, when variables are created inside of a function, those variables will only be available inside that function, inside of the function of that function. So if we create a variable in a function, it's going to be available only inside that function. So now let's create a variable here. Let's say constant. Let's say something like let's say something like let's say track. We're gonna say web. So you guys on the web track. Let's create a function and call it something like Gabi School and give it a track. So eventually we'll have more tracks. We'll have the UI, we'll have UI UX, and we'll have also data science, things like that in the future. So now let's create another no I did. Okay, let's create another variable inside. Let's say constant cohort. You guys, your cohort is web 01. And now let's console log track inside here. And track, remember, it's the parameters of this function. Now, if we invoke this function, we say every school, and we give it a something like web. Okay, so now it should so now what we did here is we have a track here and we have a track here and we have a track here. So this track is the one here. So it's basically replacing this. But we also have another track here that's a variable. So what do you think it's gonna happen? And let me put one more point before you guys answer here. So this point is that think of these curly brackets as gates. When you see them, they keep variables in. So if you see these, they keep variables in. They don't let the variables be accessed from outside. So now we have web here. It's going to replace this, and also it should cancel log from inside the function. What do you guys think it's gonna happen? Let's just test it out. So we have web. So now what it did basically, it took this, put it in here. So now if we replace this to UI, UX, it should give us UI, UX. Okay. But so that's basically so now what it's doing is it's not accessing this. So let's actually console log. Let's give it a different name here. Call it something like let's call it something like group or something like that, and give this one a group. So now if we try to access this group from here, do you guys think it's gonna access? Is it gonna print web or is it gonna print UI UX? Which one do you think?
UI UX.
It's gonna print UI UX. Okay. Someone said the screen is shaking. Is that true? You guys seen any issues?
No.
Okay. All right. Let's see. So let's clear it. Run. So it printed web. Why is that? What do you guys think?
Because he can
So this
access from the outside.
Isn't
yes.
it the global?
So this is what it's doing. It's grabbing this variable from outside. So it's console log in here, and the function is reaching outside. Let me see if I can draw something here. The function is reaching outside to this variable right there. So that's what it's doing. And if we invoke this, it doesn't matter because there's nothing that we're console logging here other than this part. So that's what it's doing. Clear?
Yes.
You clear this as far as I'm using this. So let me erase. I said clear, undo, erase everything. Okay, yeah. So that's what it's doing basically. It's reaching outside to grab it. But now let's try to reach inside actually. So if we want to reach inside the function, what we're going to do is we're going to reach this cohort. We're going to see if we can grab that and console log it. So let's console log cohort. So cohort is a variable inside the function. So do you guys think it's going to grab it?
No.
Yes.
Okay.
No.
So it's basically saying cohort doesn't exist. So it's saying it's not defined. And that is what function scope is. It's basically, we said that if you see this curly brackets, it's a gate. It doesn't allow anything to come in, but it allows the function to grab outside to get something from outside. So it can grab this variable from outside, but it cannot grab something from inside. So if we change this to var, what do you guys think is gonna happen?
Yeah, it's gonna get it now.
Yes.
So it's not letting it out. So every time you see it doesn't matter if it's var. We said that var sometimes the reason why I said sometimes you could get it from inside the function is if you return it. So if you say something like return cohort, then you could get that. You could get the var. But for now, we just keep it the way it is. So anything inside the function cannot be grabbed unless it returns. All right, give me a second. All right, so we understand that that's a function scope. Anything inside the function cannot be grabbed. All right, so let's comment this out. Let's talk about block scope for a second. Block scope. So block scope is a little bit different. Block scope is if you're using something like if statement or if you're using if you're using a for loop statement. So let's create a variable here. Actually, let's say let answer, and let's say if if 1 is equal to 1. Let's just say that, make it simple. Then we're just going to say answer is equal to it's true. Okay, so now what we're doing is we declared a variable outside, and then we're saying, okay, so within this if statement, set this answer, so assign it to something. So let's try it out. Let's see if we can console log answer. So if the if statement can reach, if this can be connected to this, it will basically console log is true. Okay, so these are like kind of connected now. These two things are connected. So this is block scope. It means that a let can reach inside the if statement. So that's what it can do. The if statement can reach outside. That's what I mean. So it's the opposite. It's always reaching outside. It's not reaching inside, because you do not want to reach inside into a program most of the time. So most of these concepts are designed so you could reach outside. So now answer is looking for if it's declared. So it's saying, okay, I have something here. It looks like a variable, but it's not declared. So let me reach outside. So it reaches outside and it says, okay, it's declared here. Now let's set it to it's true. And then you console log that here. And the reason why this is available is because we already declared it here. So it's outside already, but we declared it here. We console logged over there. So this is called block scope. You could also do it in for loop. So let's try for loop 2. Let's try for loop. So we're going to say for var I equal to 0, I is less than 10, and then increment, not that, increment by 1, I increment. So now if we do that and we console log I, okay, console log I. So let's comment this out. Console log I, it should give us the console log, right? It should give us the numbers. So this is the normal thing like you usually expect. It should give us from 0 to 9. But now if we try to if we go outside and console log I, what do you think it's going to happen? And remember, I is this, so it's declared here, var I.
Undefined.
Okay, so let's try that. Let's try that. Let's clear it and run. And remember, it's var. So the reason why it's not undefined and it's 10 here is because it's var. So var will allow you to reach inside a block scope. So not function scope, but block scope. So var is can go. You can go inside if it's a var and grab it. But if it's a let, then you have some issues. So let's actually try let. So if we change this to let, if we change that to let and we run it, we will have the issues. So now save it. So it will run, but instead of saying 10 and completing the increment, it says that I is not defined. So it's not even figured out where I came from. So and constant is even more strict. So this is block scope. So this block scope is basically if you have var, and if you have var here, it's kind of like this, even much more looser. But this shows you that let in block scope doesn't allow you to grab something from inside of this for loop. But if it's a var, then it allows you. So keep that in mind in the future. If you're making a program and you want to grab something from inside a for loop, make it so that this is var instead of let. But if you don't want to do that, then keep it as let. So I hope that makes a little more sense. Hope that makes a little more sense. So, any questions you guys have about this? About the global scope? We went through global scope. We went through function scope, which is this, and then we went through block scope. So those are three main things that to keep in mind when you're thinking
Can you
about
can you go back to blocks? No, it's a block.
block scope.
Nah,
Which one?
yeah, block scope.
Yeah, go ahead. It's right here. So
Okay, so it says let's. Can you change that to
this
for?
one, this one,
Yeah.
var.
Those kind of,
So if we cancel lock, it should be same. Because let is global scope, so you shouldn't have an issue with reaching inside. So if we refresh it and run it, should give us the it's true. Because let is loose basically. Think of it like that. It's you could call it except in a function scope. You could call it anywhere. So you could call it in global scope and also block scope, except in a function scope. But constant and let a little more strict when it comes to where you call them. But this time, as you can see here, we have a problem with constant because you cannot reassign it. Missing initializer or constant. Yeah. So as you can see here, it's not allowing us to even declare it here. So it says missing initializer in constant declaration in line 51. So one thing you cannot do about the constant is you have to declare it. I mean, you have to tell it what it has before you even move on. So you have to say something like, you have to give it like it's true here. Otherwise, it's not gonna ask anywhere when it comes to that. So let is a block scope, and we said here, actually we already talked about it. Where's the comment we made about block scope? So we said that where is it? Let constant is block scoped, but it has other rules too. So this one, the if statement is different. It has other rules that you have to follow, and which we will cover in other lessons. There's another lesson that we will cover block scoped, which is called callbacks. We'll touch it today in a little bit, but we have also another lesson for that too. So keep in mind that block scoped, function scoped, and global scoped. Global scope is you could call anything in global scope, especially variables. You could find variables in global scope. Function scoped, everything has to be in the function, and function can reach outside, but you cannot reach inside the function. And block scope, using var and let, you could reach inside, but you have to use var to you have to use var to reach. You have to use let to and var to reach inside, not constant. So that's the difference. All right. Any questions so far? I mean, it's confusing, but go ahead, Rod.
So for the loop, can you use the let? I mean we had the let or the constant to kind of loop it. I mean the
constant here. So
yeah, or the var.
So the reason why we cannot use constant here is because you're reassigning every time the I. Remember? So the I is something that you increment in, and every time you go from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, and every time you keep going, you keep like descending or ascending. So that's why we cannot use, because it's not even, it cannot call here because it will break the program, because you cannot reassign constant whatsoever. So it will not allow us to do that because you can't change constant. So a lot of times when it comes to this scope stuff, you don't even bring up a constant, because constant is just constant itself. You cannot do anything with it. You cannot change it. You cannot move it anywhere. So a lot of times you just ignore it. It's very strict. And var is the opposite. It's very loose, and you could put it anywhere, move it anywhere, except in a function scope. So those are two different things. All right, so let's see. Let me see. Let me show. Let me look at my notes. Now, what are we gonna do? Is we're gonna talk about functions. So functions can also be just like variables. See, we talked about var, let, and constant, right? But functions are also just like variables, right? So let's see. So we're gonna say constant student, let's say equal to Ahmed. And let's put a note here. Let's say functions can also be scoped in a way. Okay, so let's create a function. Let's say function call student. Let's say this function. Let's give it a student here, and let's open it and console log student. Okay, that's one function. Let's create another function. Function student2. Okay, and then let us say constant. Let's create a variable here, call it a student. I know this is all confusing. Call it student. Let's give this name Mohammed. I'll explain what I'm doing in a minute. Let's return this function and return it as the above function, this function. So let's return the above function. Let's call it student. Okay, and we will learn this in a little bit where you could pass a function within a function. So now we have two functions, and let's invoke this second function. Let's say student and invoke it like that. What do you think it's gonna happen? So now we have this function, but it's returning this function, and we call in this function. What do you guys think? Are we gonna have Ahmed or are we gonna have Muhammad? That's basically the argument.
Ahmed.
Ahmed, okay. Okay, let's try it out. So basically what's happening here is, actually there's a lot of stuff that is console logged here. Let's clear it up, call it again. So it's giving us an error. It's saying student is not a function. Maybe we misspelled something here. Student call student 2. Okay. Oh yeah, you're right. Student 2. Yeah, it shouldn't do that. Okay, let's run it again. It says undefined. So now let's see. So I don't mistaken anything. So now we have this student here. We have a student 2 here, and we're calling another student here, which is fine. We're returning this. That's fine too. Okay. So it says undefined. Why? Why does it say undefined? What do you guys think? Because we defined it here, and we're calling this function, and it should return this function. It should just execute this function, right? So the general reason is that so as you can see here, I think I'm missing something, but it should. Oh, we have a constant here, so it's not grabbing. Okay, no problem. So now this what should happen. So now this function should be executed, this function, because we called this function and it called this function. So it's two functions that call in each other, but every time we call it, this student should have been. So now if we put something here like let's say Abdi. So no, actually we can't put anything because we don't even have that. I meant here. If we put like Abdi and we run, let's see. So as you can see now, this function has a parameter. That's why we have an issue, because we have to give it a parameter for it to call. But we're calling a function within a function. So that's what we're doing. But here's the scope thing. This function is looking outside and looking for another function. So that's the scope, where the scope comes in. It's looking for, okay, it's saying, okay, I have a function. I don't see it inside here, but I see it outside, so I'm gonna grab it. So that's where the function comes from. But now let's replace this Abdi with this student, and let's run it. So now it says Muhammad, because now it's basically saying, okay, now I have a function that I'm calling, but also it has a parameter. The parameter is a variable, and the variable is inside here. If we put the variable outside, it's not grabbing outside because we already declared here. So this is what functions do basically. When they're trying to reach outside, the first thing they do is they look for inside the function. So this function looked for inside and said, okay, I'm looking for a student, but I mean I found it already, so I don't need to look for outside. So now if we get rid of this, what do you think it's gonna print? What do you guys think? Okay, so
Ahmed,
Ahmed, yes. So the reason why is it printing Ahmed?
because it can't find in the second one.
It can't find inside, so it said, okay, I cannot find the inside, and now let me give it a notation. So now it said, okay, I call this function. This function has there's a variable that I need to put in this function right here, this variable, but if this variable is not in here. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look outside global scope. Is it in here? No. Is it in here? Yes, I see a student variable, and now I'm gonna set it to this. That's what it's gonna do. That's what it's doing basically. So that's how the function is called, mostly works, and it's one of those things that you will learn a lot in coming lessons. Is that functions call outside, and we will also go deep into in a minute in the coming up the closures. We'll go deep into this, but for global scope purposes, it's basically asking the functions outside. So this is calling the function outside. Now, if we even say this, if we say this console log student, now without even calling this function, and if we get rid of this function, let me not confuse you with that function because it's another loop thing. I'm just saying that the reason why we put a function here, because I'm showing you that if you put a function inside a function, it's going to look outside. That function is going to look outside and look for it. So if we run this now, you should easily find that, find Ahmed, because it's just looking outside. But if we put here something like this, constant student equal to Muhammad, what do you think it's going to print? What do you guys think it's going to print here? So it has a variable here and it has a variable here.
Muhammad.
Muhammad, okay. Let's see. Why do you think it's going to print Muhammad? Well, why is it printing Muhammad?
Declaring inside the function.
Yes, so inside the function. So always it first looks inside the function, and then if it cannot find, it goes outside. So you guys understood this whole thing. So the only thing that was confusing is the function. The reason why we use the function is because I wanted to show you that even functions are just like variables. So right here, functions are just like variables. Variables when it comes to scoping. Scope, okay? So you look for functions exactly like you look for a variable. All right.
I don't get this part.
You don't get this part? Okay. So think of this function as a variable, okay? Just like this one, Ahmed. And now, remember we talked about how, like, right here, we have to call, we're calling this variable from inside the function. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So consider
Yeah.
this function as a variable. Just think of it as a normal variable.
Okay.
And then now we're calling it inside this function. So
Okay.
this function is looking outside and saying, okay, there's a function here. I'm going to execute it. So, but I don't want to confuse you before we read, but you could actually put this function inside this function. You could put it right there too. And then now it's going to execute because it's just looking inside. It's saying, okay, I see a function. I'm going to execute it. We're done. So
Okay.
we're going to reach there, but think of this as a variable, but it's a function, and functions are exactly like variables. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll get into it a little bit more. Let me give you another example, guys. Maybe that this another example might help. Okay. So this example, I told you guys this whole this whole thing will become a little bit mind bending. So the scope and closure are always mind bending, and keep in mind that closures we will reach and scope are not things that you are expected to understand 100% right away. So all you need to understand is that whenever you call something, especially in functions, it looks outside. Call something in function, it checks inside. If it's not, it checks outside. If you get that, you're good. And if you understand that let constant and variables and let constant and var do different things, they have a different scopes, then you're okay in the scope part. So keep that in mind. It's not like something that you understand right away. So let's see. So let's yeah, that's what I was talking about right now. Let's actually check function within a function. So let's create a new function. Let's call it say hi and give it a name. And what we're going to do here is we're going to actually write another function within this function. So this function, we're going to call it yell. So what is it going to do is it's going to yell this name. It's going to basically make it uppercase. So does anyone know how to make uppercase, how to make something uppercase in JavaScript? So we're going to say
You can use to uppercase.
To uppercase. Okay, good. To uppercase is a method that you could use for variables and arrays to make everything uppercase, and it's built in. So it's you just write whatever you have dot to uppercase, and it just changes to uppercase. So now what are we gonna do? What are we doing is we yelling. So let's invoke this function within this function. So we're gonna say yell like that. Okay. So now we're gonna invoke this function from outside. We're gonna say hi, and then give it something like Farah. Okay. And then let's actually invoke the other one too. So let's say yell, and right here. So what do you guys think? Do you think this is gonna be invoked? Do you think this is gonna work? What do you think it's gonna show here? Is it gonna say Farah with the capital uppercase, or is it gonna give us error? Think of this as like this is inside the function, and remember functions are normal like variables. So can you call a variable from inside a function? Right? So remember we just talked about it. You cannot grab something from inside a function. Remember these are gates. These are the gates right here. So this is a gate, this is a gate. So inside it, you cannot grab anything from there. So what do you think this is gonna happen if we actually even ignore this and just try to grab this?
Or why do you call that 2 times? Yelled.
So we call it 2 times because this one is inside this function. So it's inside a function. So it's a function within a function. So this is one function. Let me just draw something to it. So this is one function within this function. This function, right? Let me delete that. That was terrible.
So you have to call it 2 times.
So now I'm asking, like, is this gonna work? That's what I'm asking.
Oh, okay.
Do you think this is gonna work? I called it here,
Maybe.
but I also called it here. Why do you think is the reason why it's not gonna work?
I think it's gonna work.
Okay, let's run it. Let's see. So that one is from up above. So it gave us an error of yell is not even defined. It's not even there. Why do you think? We talked about a little bit We can explain this several times. Why is that the case? Think of this as a variable, basically, this function as variable. So you cannot grab something from inside, remember? And this function is inside. The yell function is inside this function, right? So you cannot grab anything from inside the function. So we cannot call it. It doesn't know what you're trying to call because it's blocked. So now let's just call the upper function. Let's say hi and give it Farah. Now if you run it, it should give us Farah with uppercase, right? Like that. So the main thing that you need to understand about this is that this function is a function scope itself. it's inside a function, so we cannot grab it from inside. We cannot call it or invoke it from outside, right? So that's the main thing you need to understand from this problem. Okay, so and this function is just like this variable. So if I say let name equal to Ali, and can I call that name from outside? Can I say something like console log name?
No.
So it's just like that. I cannot say yell and invoke it from outside. Does that help, guys? So the same way you cannot call this variable from inside, you cannot call yell from inside because it's a function that's inside the other function. Okay, let's move on. I think that makes a little more sense. And it will take time for you guys to kind of like get the whole thing. All right. What time is it? 5. Okay. We have 2 things to talk about. 2 more things. So we will talk about hoisting, and we'll talk about closures. So let me see my notes if we can take a break. So let's cover actually hoisting because we already actually covered it. So that'll be easy one. You guys will get it. Hoisting. I explained it last time, but now we're gonna add a little bit of a flair to it. Okay, hoisting. Let me scroll up. Hoisting. Who can tell me what hoisting is? We covered it last time.
It's just raising to up,
Mm-hmm.
raising things up.
Okay.
Like pulling.
Placing something
And
up. Okay, that makes sense. That's one thing. Okay. And what does that mean? Why do we place something outside? And what is gonna happen? So hoisting, remember we said that if you declare something, if you try to, let's say, invoke a function before it's created, so you invoke the function and then you create it, then JavaScript kind of runs your program, but it checks if that function already exists. So it checks below the invocation, and it says it exists, and now it runs the function, right? So that was a function that we explained. So let me write down my notes. So hoisting allows us to access functions, variables before they have been created. Okay, and function declaration. We talked about a little bit this. I mean, we covered the whole thing. Function declaration. Function declaration and variable declaration. When we say declaration, we just mean like when you're trying to create declarations. Are 2 things that are hoisted. So these are the only 2 things that are hoisted. Other things are not hoisted. So if you want to invoke a function, or if you're creating a function, or if you're creating a variable, those are 2 things to keep in mind. So let's quickly let me show you an example. You guys remember all this, but we add in a function now instead of just a variable. Actually, we covered a function last time. So let's just cover a little bit in depth. So we're going to create a function called working, and we're going to console log it, and say console log, it's working. So now, as you guys remember, does this work from last time we talked about?
Yeah. Yeah, it
Okay,
works.
that works. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it work?
Because the JavaScript engine is using hosting, so when you put that function, it automatically uses.
It automatically, it automatically checks if there's a function called working, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's mainly it. So that was the last thing we talked about, is that the JavaScript checks if there's something called, if there's a function called working. Okay, so that was that one we remember. Another thing is, okay, so let's see. Working. Okay, let's try something else. Okay, so that's one. Let me try one more example and see if this helps. So let's create a function, another function. Let's call it function. Let's actually put it right inside here, this function. So we're gonna say console log, and we're gonna say add 1, 2. So now what we're doing right now here is we are invoking another function that's called add 1, 2, and it's gonna add 2 numbers, but we haven't created it. So this one obviously will give us error, but now if we create that function, now it's gonna give us the error. Now if we create that function, let's create it, and let's create a function, call it add, give it a num1, num2, and return it, num1 plus num2. What do you think it's gonna happen? Is it gonna execute that function? So we're calling this function from inside this function. But this function is above this function. Do you think it's gonna happen? It's gonna do the hoisting stuff?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
No.
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 Okay. So think about what we just talked about the function scope thing. Can
I
you
think
can
it's
you
inside. Yeah.
okay?
You
So
cannot.
so this function is reaching outside, right? Basically. So this function is checking here. It's saying, okay, do we have a function called add? No. Okay. Go look for outside. So just because of JavaScript and the way it checks, it's gonna check out above and it's gonna check the bottom, right? It's gonna say, is there any function called add anywhere in the document, right? So that's what it's basically doing. So let's run, and we should have 3. So that's what's basically doing. So functions can reach outside. Think of them as like monsters reaching outside, but you cannot reach inside them most of the time, unless you have return or something like that. So as you can see here, we reached inside this one because it has a return here. That's the only way to reach inside a function. Okay, I hope that helps. So that is a hosting within a function, basically. Just adding a little bit of a wrinkle into that. All right, let's move on. We're gonna take a break in a minute, but let me finish this hosting part. Let's try something. Actually, we did talk about this, the variable stuff, but okay, we'll skip that. So we did talk about variable and how to hoist the variable. So we'll take a break and we'll come back and cover closures, which are even more mind bending than scope and hoisting. So take a break. Look outside. They say that if you sit down, I heard before, like they say that if you sit down on a computer for 20 minutes, look outside and look at a place where it's like 20 mile distance. So an open place. So your eye rests and they don't have like a wall coming against it right away. So it's something that I remember. But we'll come back. We'll take 10-minute break and we'll cover closures. Let's see you guys soon. Okay, let's get back to it. I'm just looking at. Okay, let's get back to inshallah. So let's talk about let's talk about closures. What are closures? What do they stand for? The reason why we combined scope and closures is because closures are our scopes. So they're basically a name for a scope. So we explained the different types of scope, but closures is how you kind of phrase that. That's how you basically know what is a scope. So closure. So here it says closures. Closure is a function that has access to its outer function scope, even after the outer function has returned. This means that closures can remember access variables and arguments of its outer function even after the function has finished. So we will learn what that means. It's a little more putting a function within a function, but I'll give you example. Before we dive into closures, let's first understand lexical scope. A lexical scope or a static scope in JavaScript refers to the accessibility of variables, functions, or objects based on their physical location in the source code. So lexical scope. So let's actually just look at that. It's a fancy word, lexical scope. So a lot of times people are confused about lexical scope, but lexical scope here says it means that in a nested group of functions, the inner functions have access to the variables and outer resources of their parent function. Okay, that's kind of confusing still. All right, let's write down everything. Okay, closures. Okay, or closure. All right. The first thing about closures is closures. Closures give us the ability to put functions together. So you put functions together, and we will explain the lexical scope. We'll get back to it in a minute, but let's just write down a couple of notes about closure. So closures also, they give us the ability to access functions from parent level scope in a child level scope. So remember how we talked about in HTML, we talked about that you have a parent element and you have a child element. Remember that? So just like that, but with functions now. So even after the parent function has been terminated or returned. So every time you return a function, it means it's done. It's not doing any more work. So everything you put after that return, it means it's gone. But with closures, you could put another function right after it, and it will remember. It will keep the stuff going. We'll see example of that too. Another thing about closures is that code that has been identified, and all this will make sense in a little bit when we go into the example where we can use later. So what did I say? Code that has been identified elsewhere, elsewhere can be used later. So if you declare something out from elsewhere in the function, you could use it later in the function, the lower functions. So we'll nest the functions. There's parent function and then there's child functions. So also the other one is we can pass variables down. So this one is the most important one, down, but we cannot pass them back up. So we cannot back them up. So let's see example of that with something that makes a little more sense. So let's create a function called country. Function, let's call it country and give it a country name here. So we give in a argument there here called a country name. We're giving it a parameter called country name. So this is simple. We just, if we invoke outside, we give it a country name and it does something to it. Now inside this function, let's create two variables. Let's call it lang1, which is a language one. Let's call it something like Arabic. And within here, let's say constant lang. Let's call it something like lang2. Let's call it something like Somali. So we have two languages. This country has two languages. So now Arabic and Somali. So things are simple. Let's console log now. Let's console log a message. Let's say something like, let's give it a backticks. So we're going to use these variables as template literal. So let's say let's language one. Let's say lang1 here. Lang1 here. And let's say n lang2. I don't like writing this every time. So on lang2 are the official languages of, and then we're gonna put here another one, which is the country name. Country name. So this is kind of simple now. So if we go here and invoke this function and say country, and we give it Somali, let's say, it should give us a message right here. And I hope we kind of console this. Okay, it should give us a message that says console logs that message. So it says Arabic and Arabic and Somali are the official languages of Somalia. Pretty simple, right? So now we're gonna have another function inside that keeps track of, gives us another message that says something like the official, it says something like Arabic and Somali are the official language of Somalia, and the national food of Somalia is, and the national food is this. We will give it a food. So let's create a function. So this function, we're gonna call it something like, let's call it something like province. So province. So this one is inside of the country. So every country has province. So province or state, let's call it state. Makes a little more sense. State, and let's give it a state name here.
Eddie, you didn't make it call.
Yeah, go ahead. You want to ask something?
Hello.
Yeah.
I was kind of confused how you call the function. I was looking for a function that calls Somalia. I was looking for it. I just couldn't
Oh,
find
it's right here at the bottom. I invoked the function country, which is this one. And
Wait.
we're
Oh,
creating a
okay.
new, we're creating a new function now. But now this one is just a simple. It takes.
Now I got it. I got it. Now I confused. I was kind of. I didn't see the country. That's
Oh,
like
okay, yeah.
Somalia. What function is that?
What is that?
I got it.
Yeah. So maybe you didn't see this one. So it's basically, I'm calling this function, giving it Somalia. So now let's create another function, call it state. Within this function, call it state name. Just call it state, and let's give it something like state name here. So now this is another function within this function. And remember that we said that we could reach, these functions could reach outside of themselves. So that's where the lexical scope stuff came. So this one, let's console log before we do anything. Let's console log this message itself. So we're gonna console log this message again. And let's add it here at the end of it. Let's add state here. So now, but this function will not work unless we invoke it here. So we have to invoke, we have to say state and give it a state name. Let's call it something like Benadir, something like that. So actually now let's change the message so that it just basically shows what we needed. So it says here, okay. let's just call this function actually. So let's run it. Let's clear this, run. Let's see what happens. We should have 2 messages running. So we have 2 messages. So the second message is this state one. So we're going to put a state so we know which one is which. And we run it again. It says it's state here. The reason why this is happening, we have a variable here, we have another variable here, and we have a function here, or a function argument. So now this function is calling outside. It's basically saying, okay, I want to check what is happening outside. And let me draw this. So it's basically saying, I want to check what's happening outside. I have 2 variables. I have 1 and 2. And also I have a function or a argument. Let me look for something that I can replace with that. And it just goes here and it's like, oh, I found that variable, I found that variable, and I found this name here. And this name, country name, is right here for Somalia. So that's what's basically doing. It's looking outside. So here's the thing. When we say lexical scope, that's what we mean. Lexical scope is a function, a child function can look outside of its parent function. So that's we understand that. So now that's what we explain. But okay, let me just erase this so they're making it mess. But let's create another variable within this function. So let's create something like constant. Let's say something like food is equal to Angelo. I mean, I don't even know anybody who eats Angelo anymore. Is it just me or is it like that? People just eating something else these days. So now we're gonna write here on the national food is, I don't know if that's the national food, is we're just gonna say we're gonna give it that variable. But here's the interesting stuff, that this function, I don't even know why there's notation here. So remember what we said about we can pass down variables, but we cannot pass them back up. That's what it means. So we cannot pass up this Angero to this function, to the country function. Does that make sense for everyone? So we're replacing this with food. So if you try to call this in this function somewhere in here, it will not work. And that's a lexical scope. That's the lexical scope we talked about. And that's generally a closure. That's what we mean by closure. So now we should have 2 messages that the first one says, this, and the other one adds the national food is Angero. Okay. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So this function, it's indented. You can indent it like that, and it's called here. So now we have this, but we haven't used this. So for this thing, we're going to use it for the next function. So the next function, we're going to go inside. So the next function is the city function. So let me see.
So
I'm gonna go ahead.
do you mean the function inside the function?
Yeah, we're gonna put another function inside this function.
Okay.
Yeah. So right here, let's actually just create another function. And this is where it gets to the kind of like the confusing part, is having all these functions inside themselves. So you have to just see where a function ends. So that's why I have to kind of like give it a message here and say end of state function here. So this is where state function ends. This is the end of country function. So you could see where things end basically. And you could see here by the start of them. You can see here, and you can see another start here. So keep that in mind. Track that. So now we create another function called city, and we're gonna give it a city name here. And we're gonna open this function, And also, okay. So now we're gonna give this one a message too, but actually this one can access the food now, right? So let's actually test it out. Let's before we go into the city one, let's test it out and see if the food can be accessed from here. So if we actually just copy this and put it right here, what do you guys think is gonna happen? Is it gonna work? And why it's not gonna work? What do you guys think? It's already in different color, right? It's already in a different color. I don't know why it's that. So the reason for that is because this function cannot look. I mean, so the variables cannot go up. Basically, that's what we said here. We can pass down, but we cannot go up. So you can't call a variable from outside. So if we run now, we're gonna have issue with that because the food is not declared anywhere in this function. And this function, all it's doing is it's saying, okay, I have a food variable. I don't know what it is, but I want to know where that is. It looks inside itself, and then it says, okay, I don't have that. Let me look outside. It looks for global scope. It doesn't have that, and then it's like, I don't even know what's happening. I don't have that food. So that's what's basically happening. Keep that in mind. Okay. So we can go down and add a city variable, but let's actually just keep the state, because now you understand the general idea is that this function can call its parent function, which is this one, but the parent function cannot grab something from inside this function. So you understand the general concept. So we don't have to keep adding more functions inside. Any questions about that and how the functions are related to each other? Any questions? So this is called the lexical scope, and it's the beginning of closure. I mean, we're not done with closure yet. I'll show you one more example of how it's important. So that's when you call in function within a function. Keep in mind that you cannot go up with the variables. You can only call down. Okay. So next example, I'm going to use a sports example. We're going to create a function called sports. Function sports. So I'm giving all these examples, not sports, the game. I'm giving all these examples because I want you guys to kind of understand what is happening. Maybe some of you will understand this example. Some of you will understand this example maybe better. I know some of you are into sports too. So now we have a function called this. So let's give it here a ending thing right there, so you don't confuse that. Let's close this, comment all this out. Okay. Okay. Let me know if you have any question anytime. Just let me know. You could message it or anything you want, even privately if you like. So now let's, in sports you always have a score, right? So every team needs to have every sports needs to have a score. Now let's return this function, and let's actually just return another function. So we just returning another function called win, and we're just gonna open this function. So when you return a function, that means it's basically kind of like calling it. So you're actually executing it inside. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab the score and do that. Remember, we can only grab something from outside, not this cannot grab something from inside. So, and then we're gonna increment this. So now what is happening is this is incrementing the score by 1. So automatically this is keeping track of the score, and it's incrementing by 1. And if you see that's plus plus, that plus plus, it means increment by 1. If you see 1 plus 2, increment by 2. So if instead of saying increment by 1, we just say plus plus. Now we're going to return this function, the inner one, and we're going to give it a message and say something like your we're going to say your score game score is, and then we're going to put here it's sports. So let's give it a template literal and give it a sport or sports. Let's put it here sport only. Sport. And okay, your sport. So we're gonna try different sports. We're gonna try soccer and basketball, whatever, we're gonna try different ones. So is, and then we're gonna give it here template literal, another template literal, and give it the score itself. So the reason why we're doing all this is because if we put this outside of this function, if we put this outside, every time we call it, it's not going to keep track of the score. It's going to reset every time. It's going to say 1 0 1 0. But if we put it inside the parent function, this function is going to keep track of the score because it's incrementing, and it will say 1 2 3 as long as you call the win function. I mean, as long as you call the game function. So, but we have to create another function to store the game function. Okay, so this is where the something called private variables come in. So private variables. So let's private variables. Private variables are like variables that you could set to a function, and they will act like a container for that function, but they will store the information. They will not release it. They will not kind of like reset the information. So now let's create something like constant. Let's create like football and equal to game. Let's see. Okay, let's game and game here. Game, and give it something like football here. Football. Okay. So now this is our sports. So now what it's going to do is it's going to take this and we cancel out the football, and it's a function. So we're going to invoke it. So this is a function because we're just storing this function in here. So now basically what it's doing is it's calling this function, and everything that this function keeps track of the score. So it keeps incrementing, and every time we call it, it stores the information in this variable, and the variable itself is the function. It's a little bit confusing, but you will see when we run it, you will see the example. So now it's gonna say, sorry, console log can be defined. Okay, I spelled it. Console log. Okay, clear. So we should have the sports 1 by 1. So your football game score is 1. So as you can see here, so what it's doing is it's taking the parameters, I mean the argument we gave, it's taken to sports and it's storing it here. And then what it's doing is this function is invoking this function. It's calling this function. It's returning. Apparently it says return here. So it's returning. And then this function is incrementing by 1. So it's adding 1 here. So now if we keep calling this function, if we just call it again here, and again 3 times, we should have like 1, 2, 3, the score. So that's one of the things about closures, is that if you nest a function within a function, it doesn't reset. So now if we actually put this at the top, can we put it at the top? Okay. So if we put it here, so let can be called from score can be called from here. It's gonna look here and it's gonna look up here. Hopefully it works. I didn't try that. So now if we try this, so it says it's still 1, 2, 3. Okay. So usually, I think it's the increment. If you put the increment outside, right here in this function, it will not keep track. It will just say 1, and then it will say 1, 1, 1. So that's one of the things. Like if you want to keep track of something, That's what you could do. If you create another game, you could create another sports from here too. You could say constant soccer, let's say. I mean, soccer, football is the same. So let's say basketball, and say game is equal to basketball. Okay. Now, if we call this basketball and console log it, it will keep track of basketball separately. If we keep track, it will keep track of the basketball separately. So now, if we erase this and we call this like a couple of times, two more times, and we run it, it will say, okay, so now what it's doing is it's calling football 3 times and it's keeping the score, and it's separately keeping the score of the the basketball. So the reason it's doing that is because it knows that this is a different function. It's you're setting, you're taking the function and you put it in another variable, and it says, okay, there's a new function that's coming through. Let's give it a score itself too. So this whole thing comes down to this function, the win function, can call the score here, and it can increment it. That's what it comes down to basically. So that's closure. If you ever hear closure, is that another function, the inside function that's being returned, can call the function outside, but the function outside cannot find anything inside. It cannot. If you set something here, this one cannot use the variables in here. So a lot of times you will see this in like when you're doing databases, API calls, things like that. You will see this, but you will not see it in like normal JavaScript. You will just see it in like when you're trying to get information from a database. Let's see. So now let's try. Okay, let's see if we can call. What do you guys think? What if we just call the win function? Can we just call it by itself? So what if we say console log win? What do you guys think is gonna happen? What do you think? Is it gonna call this message? It's gonna grab this message.
Maybe you
I don't
got
know.
Austin.
What is that?
I think it may work because of the hosting.
Okay, let's try it out. Let's see. Let's close this and run it. So you know why the reason it's not it cannot run. Remember what we said about region inside a function. So this function is being returned, but it's just a function. It's not like a variable. So if it's a variable being returned, you could grab it, but you're trying to run this function. You're not trying to just grab it by itself. So if this was a variable, let's say was returning a score, and if we try to grab score from here, and the score is right here, now it will run. The reason for that is this is just it would say, okay. Oh, it's because of let. Okay, never mind. So if we say here var, it will allow that. Okay. So a lot of times when you're trying to grab something from a okay. What did I do wrong? Oh, okay.
The sports.
Yeah, because of sports. Okay, let's just delete that. So now if we delete it, yeah, because we have an argument, we have a parameter, and we didn't give it argument. And did I do something wrong with the score? Okay. Okay, so we're returning, or usually when you're trying to return, you say something like 2 plus 5. So if you want to return something, it should be, from my understanding, it should be like a calculation of something, some type of thing. Interesting. So this is something I haven't seen before. I might call. Okay. I'm not even calling the function, I think. I'm not grabbing the function. So let's invoke the function. Say game here. Let's see what it returns. Okay. Console log. Okay, delete that. Run. It should give us console log. So we're reaching inside the function, but we're returning it. So that should have worked. Okay. Now it should work because we're console log is not defined. Misspelling it. Console log. All right. Someone send me a message. You can reach in and grab. Yeah. So this is returned. If we put a message here, if we say 0 here, this is normal because we ran in the function. But if we try to grab it, let's see, console log score, and we try to, it's gonna say no. Okay, I think it's something to do with the return. I will figure it out later. But let's go back to our original flow of closure, which will return in a function. So functions are, you could pass functions like variables, and you could return them, but you cannot call them from inside a function. So it has to be lexical scope. When we talk about lexical scope, is that this scope has access to its parent, and it also has access to outside. But this function has no access to the inside function. So you cannot declare something here and call it from this function. That's the main thing you need to understand about the lexical scope. So that's mainly closure. Any questions? I know it's a little confusing. We have one more thing to cover, and we'll be done. Should take a yeah?
Can you scroll down?
Sure. Let me scroll down. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so where it says football equal to game. Yeah,
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah.
What's that part? Is that a function, or are you calling the function, or
I'm storing this function in a variable, so I can call it. I can console
oh,
log
so you
it.
can store a
Yeah, I'm just console logging it like that. So it's a variable, and we took this function, which is this one, and we put it in this function so that it keeps track of how many times we call it. So if you do this, if you just call the function by itself, it will not give you the 1, 2, 3 thing. So now if we just do this and we console log just this function right here, it will not give you that. Let's see. So if we do that and we just get rid of this and this, and we have to open this function. So it's a Maghrib time, so we'll take a break 10 more minutes so we can go pray. So now it's gonna call the message. Actually, we just called the function. We just what happened? We kind of console log the whole function itself. So let's invoke it here first. Clear. Oh, okay. So this is what it's doing basically. The reason why it's returning that. The reason why we're using it is because if you return a function and you say, okay, give me this function, and you console log this function itself, it's going to give you this function. It's not going to run this function. So as you can see, when we console logged it, it console logged this function. So the win function. So it's basically saying, here's the function. We didn't run it, but have it. So it's giving us the actual function without running it, without executing it. So if we want to execute that function, we have to save this function in here, and that's how it's going to call it. So that's how it's going to run the inner function. So we're going to save this function here, and then we're gonna call it as we're gonna call that function. So it's basically you activating this function by using another function as from outside. So a variable, you turn it into a function, you activate this function, the game, and it runs this function. So this is kind of like how it works. The first time I learned, I didn't understand why do we have to equal it to a variable, but they told me that this is, if you want to activate this inner function, you have to put the upper function in a variable and then console log that variable, which is a function itself, as you can see here. So if you run it, it should give you like the 1, 2, 3 thing. So the general thing to understand is the lexical scope is where you call outside function and you cannot call inside. If you understand that, you'll be good. And another thing to understand is if you want to keep track of a score, you could create 2 functions and then call them like this. Anything you want to keep track of, and it will just increment it just like normal. And it will also remember. So if we refresh everything, right now we're in CodeBin, but if you like refresh the whole window and close the whole window and come back, it will remember that it was at 3, and it will just, that function will just keep running. It will just keep going. So it stores that information in the memory of the JavaScript engine, basically. So it's very important when you're trying to like keep track of something and then you want to use it later. So that's generally Clojure. You're not expected to understand it fully right away. You're expected to just understand how to use it, how functions are like variables, and there's something called lexical scope. And if you call a function, if you have a variable in a function and you have another function inside that function, that the inside function has a access to the variable. That's mainly what you need to understand about the closures. So we'll take a break. We'll go pray, the Minnesota people, and come back and cover something called higher order functions, callbacks and higher order functions. So it's not in the notes, but we'll quickly go over it, and it relates to this. So we'll cover that. So I'll see you guys in about 10 minutes. Let's take a break and pray, inshallah. Okay, let's see. 10-minute timer. Okay. Let's get back to it, inshallah. I hope everyone's done. I know some people are in other states and they already prayed. Okay, we'll finish it soon. This might take a little longer than the other ones, but I hope you guys get something from this, all the examples. I want to go back to quickly to the one we finished. I think you guys can hear me, and I want to show you something. Maybe that might kind of like show you something that might help. So if we take this whole function, and yeah, we take this whole function and we go to a browser and open the console log. Hopefully this works. I didn't try before. And if we run it, so we have this function and we invoke it. Let's run it the way we were running. And I want to explain a little bit more about what this is because you guys were a little bit confused about it. It's called reference. So I didn't use the right word. So now if we reference foople and kind of call it like that, we'll have that. So it gives us a score. So what I'm trying to get to is I wanted to show you something about this. So we need to put here. So this is called reference. So I was telling you guys that when they taught us just this is how you call it. But this is a reference to this function, the win function. So this is so when we set this variable, it's referring to this function, and it's basically every time we call this reference, it adds a one number to it. So the first one is 1, 2, 3. If we add another one, it adds to another one. So it's basically running this and saying, okay, add 1 to it, the reference to this. So this is a reference to win. Keep that in mind. So that's all I wanted to add. But I also wanted to show you a where the scope came from. Not the scope, I mean closure. So if we say something like, I don't know how I'm gonna run here. Let's put something like, let's put something here. Let's put something like debugger here. Debugger is something in CodeBen that stops the program from executing. So let's run and see if this actually works in here. So it still works, but that's not where we're going for. So we're gonna go here and go to source. I haven't tried this before, so I'm gonna try to find it where it is. So if we run it here, so this we try to execute the code in the browser so that I can show you where the closure is. And closure is basically the function that we're running. So closure is a function that grabs something from above function. The call stack. Okay. So the scope here. So remember we talked about the scope, and there's a scope here. So you can see it collapses, and if we open it, we have a couple of scopes. We have one scope called local. If we open the local, this is the normal one. We have the window. If we open closure, we have a lot of stuff in here, closure. So we don't want this. Let's open this closure. Okay, global scope. It should have shown us. I think we didn't run it correctly. Debugger passed. Okay, let's run again. Okay, yeah. So it's running, but it's kind of like giving us a hard time. Close this. Open this. Let's run this function. So somehow it should show here the closure, which is the function that we're running. The win function is the closure. So it should show us that. But I'll give you example other times in another lessons. But this is a closure, and the browser actually understands this is a closure because it's it's grabbing information from another this function, and this is a reference to win. So that's all you need to understand from this one. All right, let's move on. Any questions about this game thing, like how it runs and stuff? Let me know. Um, let's talk about a something. The last thing we're going to talk about, which is callbacks and higher order functions. It's not in the lesson, so this is something new to you if you haven't read it. So callbacks, and high order, and this is really important in your in the advanced JavaScript and also in React higher order functions, and we'll explain what these are. So higher order functions are functions that receive other functions. Remember how we just gave this function another function? This function is a high order function. So that's all you need to understand about high order functions. So high order functions receive other functions as parameters. And this one is not even like that much of a high order function. So if sports was a function, then this would be high order function. So and I'll show you what the example of actual high order function. Callbacks. What is callback? Callback functions are passed into high order function. So callback functions is the opposite of high order function. Remember we said if you pass a function in a parameter, then that function is the one you pass into is a high order. The one you pass in, the one in the parameter, is callback function. So you call in back later. So high order functions. So callbacks are passed into high order functions as an argument. Arguments. All right, another 1.1 point high order. So that one, yeah. So the next point just repeats the same thing, but that's mainly what you need to understand about high order functions, is that they are functions that receive other functions as the parameters. And remember, parameters are these are parameters, and also arguments are these. So football is an argument. So let's see. I'll give you example of like a chef and kitchen and cooking food, things like that. So here in this example, we have the kitchen. We're going to create a function called kitchen. This is a high order function. Kitchen is a higher order function. Okay, so let's create that kitchen function. So we're gonna be creative and do this and create a kitchen here. Remember, we said there's different ways of writing a function. So this is another way. So we're just practicing. So function, and here we're gonna call it something like. So think of a kitchen as like you're ordering something, right? So you want the chef to cook food for you. So we're gonna create another function, other functions of uh, how to create a food, basically a chef creating food. So we're going to create a pizza chef, we're going to create a pasta chef. Okay, so we're going to create two chefs, but we have to pass them into this function so that they execute. So we're going to say something like item, we're going to say like, so we're going to item 1, I'm going to say item 2, and then we're going to call chef here. So let's open this function and say return chef, which is a function that we will create. And this is like a sort of like a reference to a function that we will create. And this is called callback function. So chef is a callback function here. So let's put it right here. Chef is a callback function, because we're passing it in the parameters of this function, and this is a high order function. Kitchen is a high order function, and chef is a callback function that we will create other functions and they will use that to make their food and stuff. So now we will pass two parameters, item 1 and item 2. Okay, so this is the high order function. It's asking for three things. It's asking for two parameters, and it's asking for a function as a parameter. All right, so far you guys following me? High order function is this. This is a callback function that we did not create yet, and we are returning it. We're returning it with the two items that we created. So these two items will be, we will create, and we will send these two items, and the chef will take those two items, let's say some food, and we'll use the high order, we'll use the callback function to make that food. Does it make any sense? Anyone has a question about it? High order function, callback function. Okay. So now we're going to create the callback function. Callback function. So the callback function, we're going to call it something else. We're not going to call it chef. Chef is just a reference. Remember how we create argument? The argument on the thing that we're calling the parameters is not the same, right? So the parameter is something we made up, and the argument is the input that we're putting in. So that's the difference. So we're going to create a function here. We're going to call it something like constant. We're going to call it pizza chef. Pizza chef. And we're going to create this function. We're going to give it the two items. We're going to say item 1, item 2. Okay. And now we're just going to return this function. We're going to say return, give it a backtick. We're going to say I took, and then we're going to create a template literal and say something like, I know this is taking like more time, but I hope you guys are getting something from it. So 1, and I took, let's see, let's create the template literal here too, item 2. Item 2, okay. And I made you a pizza. So now, so this is the callback function. So we're taking this function, giving it as a parameter for the chef, and we're taking these two parameters, which we will call, and we just say, we say console log. Let's see, I think we're going to say console log. Yep. We're going to say console log. Actually, we don't have to console log this by itself because this is a callback function. You're not console logging callback function. We're invoking this one, and then it's gonna make it's gonna call this function for us automatically because we already asked it to call it. So now what we need to do is we need to just console log this function and call it. So we're gonna say console log. Let's call the kitchen function, and let's give it two parameters. So we'll give it these parameters, 1, 2, and 1, 2. These parameters we're giving it. So we're gonna say something like sauce, and let's give it a dough, which is a like the burka lagu kariyo, a pizza. And then now we're gonna give it this function as a argument. So we're gonna say pizza chef. Just like that, not like that. So just like that. We're not gonna invoke it because it's gonna invoke for us. So far, any questions? Because right now, if we run it, it should give us this message, and it should replace the sauce and dough with these two items, and then it's gonna run this function right here. This is the callback function. Any questions? So let me run. So it's gonna say I took sauce and what else? Okay. Item 1, item 2. Oh, okay. So I took sauce and this one. Oh yeah, you're right. So I took sauce and I took dough and I made you a pizza. Any questions so far? What the callback functions are? This is also confusing at the beginning, so just think about it for a little bit. This is a higher order function. This is a callback function. We're executing or invoking this function, and we're passing it two things. So it's asking us to pass two things. We did. Okay, these are the normal things that you did before when you put in a parameters in a function. But now there's a third thing, which is a function. So this function chef is going to be executed by this function, the high order function. So all we're doing is we're just taking this whole function we created, putting it in here, and let me just do the drone stuff. Might help some people. So this is high order function, okay. This is high order function, HOF. That's how they write it sometimes, HOF. This is the callback function. Basically, we're calling it back later, CP sometimes. That's how it's written, CP. And now this is the invoking this function. So it's invoking this function, high order function, invoke. Any questions so far? So it's invoking, but we're passing this pizza right here, and this is gonna go into, it's gonna go all the way to right here, chef, as a chef. So remember how we said that functions, it doesn't matter what the parameters is. You could change the you could pass anything in the argument. So I was giving example to Khadija as, I think I said something about think of like ATM machine. In ATM machine, you put your card and it gives you cash. Okay, so why didn't it give you your card? So so if you try to say, okay, why don't we just put the same thing here? Why don't we just say chef here? It's like basically saying, why don't we just put the credit card in the ATM machine and then get a credit card from the ATM machine? You know, so that's what we're basically saying. So this is what it's doing, is it's you giving a card and it's doing work for you, and then it gives you the cash. So that's what we're doing. So if you hear parameters, think of as parameters are like think of like as the money. So it's like a money, like a number, like in your bank it says something like $200, right? The $200 is not, you don't have it, like you don't actually have the cash, but it's a placeholder for your money. And now if you go to the ATM machine and you put your card, you get the money back. That's the pizza. That's the pizza we're getting right now. You're getting your money back. Now we rendering the function or invoking the function. It's basically going to ATM machine and just getting the money back. Any questions so far about this?
What is CP snapper?
What? CP? Callback function.
Yeah.
So from now on, if you see where it says chef, from now on we're going to say CP. So in the next lessons and the lessons after that, we're just going to say CP here. So assume that it's going to be callback function.
Just curious, could you use let
In where?
right here in this HOF?
Oh, in the higher order function in here?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean you could use let, but we're not returning the let. So we're returning only a function right here, right? So if we let me just delete this. You could take a screenshot next time if you want. I don't know how to delete all of them at once, but if we put a variable there, it's not gonna execute. The reason for that is because it's returning only a this function. So if we put something here, let name equal to Abdi, it's not gonna do anything because we're not returning that. So it's not gonna do anything. It's just gonna do its work and call this function and be done with it, right? If we want to do this, we have to return that name here. So whatever you say return, the function is gonna return, but it's not gonna return anything other than that, right?
Got it.
Yeah. Any questions about callback function and high order functions? So now let's actually let's ask it to cook something else for us. So let's say constant. So we're going to create another callback function. We say constant pass the chef. Let's say this one, pass the chef, and give it a function of same thing, item one, item 1, no, item 1, item 2, and return it the same message, but let's just make it different. So I took this and that, and I made you a pasta, right? Spaghetti, sorry. It's spaghetti. I made you a spaghetti. So now we should have the same thing, but 2 messages. Yeah. No, actually, I'm missing something. Let's see. What are we missing? Line 191. Right here, we're missing something. Unexpected token of that. Oh, function. Okay. It's not written well. Okay. I was wondering why these didn't become that color. All right. So now we should like kind of replace the information to different things. Oh yeah, we have to kind of like give this, we have to call this 2 times. And replace this. So sauce, you don't use, do you use sauce or do you use, yeah, you use sauce on dough for pasta too, right? I mean, spaghetti, when you're making spaghetti. So now all we're doing is just we're replacing the 2 callback functions, and we clear it, and you get these 2 messages, but the 2 different. So this one says I took a sauce and a dough and I made you a spaghetti. So it's calling this callback function, and it's calling this callback function at first. So this is higher order function. This is the callback functions, and they all go in here, and it gets returned. So functions are just like objects. Functions are objects. So you could pass them in a function, in another function. You could set them to a variable. So you could pass them around, whatever. Any questions so far?
So
And-
the
and-
high order, the
Yeah, go
high
ahead.
order number can pass it through the like one other return. I mean callback.
So it's using the callback. So this is the callback. So we could
Mhm.
just call it this callback and put it here, callback.
Okay.
And that would be fine too, right? That will also work. It doesn't matter what you call it,
Okay.
as long as you understand what it is, what this is. So I was giving it as a chef, so that you think of it as like, oh, the chef cooked you a pizza chef, and then there's a pasta chef, and every time it gets invoked, it gets called, and the chef goes and kind of like puts together something here, and puts together something here. But you could call it that, and sometimes, a lot of times, you'll see CP. So from now on, we'll not talk about it. So it will be just passed around. So you will see CP, and then just assume that that's a callback. So CP equal to callback function.
Understand.
Okay, that's pretty much it. Any questions so far? We're gonna close down. I'm gonna talk about the assignments for today. Although I have to mention something. So let me know if you have a question. So the assignment, you guys have to wait until tonight, because I have to add this the callback functions and stuff, questions. So you have to wait for that. So do not clone it yet. Clone it by tomorrow. You could start cloning it. So tonight I'll add the callback function problems, and there's not much there. So I'll also add 1 or 2 more problems, inshallah. So you can practice. It's kind of hard to find any problems related to scope, unless you kind of like create something much more complex. So I'm trying to find an easier, kind of easier to a medium thing for you guys. So don't clone it yet, but clone it tomorrow whenever you want, and then go ahead and just fork it. Who's watching this, anyways? I have a couple of people watching it. So if you see start in GitHub, it means these people are keep an eye on this repository. Any questions so far before we close up? All right, so I'll let you guys go. You could take a break. You could keep working on the previous assignment. Push whatever code you have tonight, and you have tomorrow and you have Monday. We'll come together on Monday, 6 p.m. So, and that day you will start working on this assignment. So tomorrow, take a break. Don't do any coding. It's for your health. We only have one day, so take a break. Don't open the computer tomorrow. Monday, come back. Whenever you have a time, start working on the previous assignment if you want. If you haven't finished it, I mean, expecting you to finish because we we didn't do anything all day today, and also yesterday you were supposed to also do it. But I understand sometimes it's difficult, but you're not gonna get this leeway, this extended time all the time. So keep that in mind. If you kind of like fall behind, make sure you get ahead of it and let me know. Oh, I see the assignment. I just don't know anything. What is going on? Can you explain something to me? So if you do it ahead of time, it's easier for you and it becomes easier. But inshallah, let's do our best and we'll be good, inshallah. So I'll see you guys on Monday. Take care. All right. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay. عليك السلام ورحمة الله.